Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Safeguarding Education Overview Scrutiny Committee here today on the 12th of September. Before, I think we'll do the introductions when we get to the items. So if I could start off with item 1 and apologies.
We have apologies this morning, Chair, from Councillor Mrs Jessel, Councillor Mr Snape, and we also have a comment from Mr McMahon that he may be a little bit late.
Thank you. Item 2 then, declarations of interest. None. Item 3, minutes of the last meeting held on the 25th of July. I assume everyone's had the opportunity to read them. Are you happy that I sign them as a true and accurate record? Thank you very much. And item 4 then, Staffordshire Safeguarding Children's Partnership Annual Report 23 to 24. It might be useful, I think, if we just go around the table so at least people who don't know understand who we are. Like I say, this is Safeguarding Education Overview Scrutiny Committee. My name's Bob Spencer. I'm an elected member and I chair this committee.
I'm Jill Burnett-Faulkner. I'm an elected member for Kidsgrove and I'm the Vice Chair of Overview. Thank you.
Gillian Pardesi, elected member for the Stafford Central Division.
Good morning everyone, Councillor Anne Edgerer and I'm the member for the Stafford South East Division.
Good morning everyone, my name is Janet Eagland and I'm the representative for Lichfield Rural North.
Morning everyone, my name is Cursor Kath Perry and I represent Essington, Great Worley and Cheslin Hay area. Okay, thank you.
Good morning. Michael Metcalfe, Reverend Michael Metcalfe, a co-opted member on behalf of the Church of England.
And Conor Wileman, elected member for Burton Tower Division.
And the panel, of course.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Heather Johnston. I'm Chief Nursing and Therapies Officer for the Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent Integrated Care Board.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Detective Superintendent Nikki Furlong from Staffordshire Police.
Good morning, I'm Bernie Brown, the Director of Children's Services for Staffordshire.
Thank you very much. I think if someone could talk us through the report, I think we've all had the opportunity to read it. And also I'm sure members will be aware that we had a report, I think, from the independent scrutineer Ian Vanell last year, and it was quite a damning report, in fact quite shocking in its conclusions. I'm really pleased to see that the tone of this report is far more positive, although it does seem to identify that there's still work to do, and I suppose that would be understandable. Bernie, I just wonder if you could take us through the report, or if there's someone could. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think if it's okay, what I'd like to do is just start by taking everybody through the forward and then hand over to colleagues, particularly Bernie, who's got a few notes, and then we're obviously happy to take any questions. But we thought in terms of context, it would be really useful to do this. I appreciate you've all had it and you've all read it, but I think important to go through it. So this year's been a big year in the world of safeguarding children, with the publication of Working Together 2023 at the end of last year. And in June this year, so only a couple of months ago, we've appropriately now transitioned to a better, I think, partnership approach as defined by the revised Working Together guidance, the legislation. We've worked as a collective to review and develop our shared vision, mission and values, with children being at the heart of everything we do. The new arrangements have to be published by December 24 and they will be published by 2024. And there's also a major rebranding exercise underway, as you can imagine, moving away from the old SSCB branding to one where we talk about very definitely that partnership. And again, that will be published and completed by December 2024. The work of the Safeguarding Partnership and its relevant agencies in Staffordshire is obviously wide-ranging, and each agency is working exceptionally hard to improve its services and care to the children of Staffordshire. But it's what we're doing together that's really, really important. So through this annual report, we've tried to shine a light, or we do shine a light, I don't think we've tried, I think we definitely have shined a light on some of the partnership's key priority areas and the activity that's being undertaken, and importantly, the difference that this is making to children and to their families. We're clear on further action required and needed to strengthen the local safeguarding arrangements, and I note your reference back to the independent scrutineer's report, and of course how this can be approached. So the report that you've all read and seen, it aims to provide key stakeholders, including members of the public and our wider communities, with a level of assurance and details of accountability about the impacts and effectiveness of the local safeguarding arrangements in Staffordshire. As strategic safeguarding partners, there is an absolute commitment to offer challenge, not only to ourselves, but also to our partnership system. We will continue to seek assurance that our safeguarding system and its arrangements are as safe as practicable, and that our workforce feels supported and confident with children being listened to and importantly heard. We recognise that it's the commitment, dedication, care and passion of all of our practitioners at every level that gives children and their families daily, given to children and their families daily, that's the heart of our arrangements, and of course we'll seek to strengthen this further in 24-25, so in the year ahead. I'll stop there and hand over to Bernie, I think.
Thanks. So I think for you as a scrutiny panel, it is important to note that the shift and the presence of the three of us as strategic partners speaks to that shift, that there is very much an ownership of the fact that safeguarding is everybody's responsibility. The responsibility does not just sit with the council, and the new working together arrangements across the country are really supporting that and supporting the expectation that the Chief Constable, the Chief Executive of the ICB and the Chief Executive of the Council have that strategic leadership responsibility that they delegate to the three of us as representatives of those organisations at a very senior level. And I think you talked about the slightly more positive frame of reference this year, and I think next year's report will start to show the ownership of the multi-agency data set, which we will use to inform practice. So what's happening in terms of policing, child-focused policing, what's happening in relation to the development of wider kind of universal and support services to make sure that families have the support at the right time in the right place within their various communities across the districts in Staffordshire, as well as that kind of wider systemic approach. Because part of good safeguarding is the awareness of what the risks are within different communities, and how we as a multi-agency partnership respond and to those risks, but also how we support our staff and our approach to practice. The thematic areas that are covered in the report are effective practice. Are our child protection processes, are the way that we work to safeguard children, are they working effectively? Do we have enough staff? Do we have the capacities to support those? and we're consistently engaged in dialogue and discussions, and the work of the board between now and Christmas will focus on a bit of a challenge session on what do we do well, what do we need to focus on, how do we incorporate and combine the data that we have, so police data, health data, social care data, together to inform where we focus our work. There's been a lot of developments around the voice of the child and the voice of families, quite rightly, but also the voice of practitioners helping us to understand what is working well, and so that our investment is targeted at key areas. And then the other priorities around safeguarding in education, so supporting children in schools to feel safe, and the wider issues around exploitation in our communities, and making sure that our multi-agency approach is effective in both identifying, diverting and supporting children across those strands. We've got a very significant training offer for the multi-agency partnership staff, and we have significant learning from child safeguarding practice reviews that then feed into changes that we might make into the services. So I think, in summary, the report is a comprehensive view, and I think, Chair, you referenced that that there's always work to be done in this space. So it is a work in progress. We continue to aspire to ensure that all children are safe from harm in Staffordshire, but it is a challenging context. But strategically, we are committed to working across the partnership to be able to give you assurance that we have the staffing capacity and the resource capacity to deliver well in the safeguarding space for all children and their families in the Staffordshire communities.
No, thank you for that, and that is hugely encouraging, of course. If I could just, before I open this up, just try to get a little clarity around some of the governance of this, because certainly, and you'll forgive me for keep going back to last year's report, but it was quite shocking. And one of the conclusions of that report was that the partnership wasn't working together effectively as a partnership. It didn't have any joint vision or goals in mind. And I note that Mr. Vanel told us that he was the outgoing scrutineer, but yet he seems to still be the scrutineer, and he's not here today. I just wondered if you could clarify who is the independent scrutineer, and also just to give some more, the fact that the three partners are sitting here in front of us today is encouraging in itself, of course. But I do think, given the nature of the previous report, it would be useful to get some more reassurance that that the partnership is working effectively, as you pointed out. And actually, where is that governance? Where does it lie? And where does the scrutiny process lie within the whole of this report?
So I think Ian remains the independent scrutineer, and as I said, we've got a development session to look at and confirm the new vision, because obviously the new working together has set out a different expectation across the country for safeguarding partnerships. So we're no longer called board, and the governance and accountability, as I said earlier, sits with the three most senior officers across the three partners. So the Chief Constable, the Chief Exec of the Council, and the Chief Exec of the ICB. The three of us are designated safeguarding partners. We have the accountability and responsibility for ensuring that the safeguarding system, the partnership across Staffordshire, is working effectively, and where it isn't, that we respond quickly and efficiently. I can't speak to the past. I've only been in post 10 weeks. I can speak to the future, and with my colleagues here can give you an assurance that this will not be the last meeting that the three of us attend in relation to safeguarding and the scrutiny of safeguarding and that function. And we are, what I've seen in the 10 weeks is the commitment of the partnership to move forward under the new arrangements, under the new working together guidance, and that we will continue to improve and continue to better understand from stronger performance management arrangements where the risks are, where our areas of focus need to be, and reporting those issues into our three respective chief executives, chief constable, and making sure that the resources are deployed in the right place at the right time, so children continue to be safeguarded. I don't know if either of you want to add anything.
I suppose it's just to really reflect on what Bernie said there. There's been a significant step change in the partnership arrangements in Staffordshire. So Ian, is fully still involved in the work of the Safeguarding Partnership. He features at the meetings that take place, so he's got that real clear line of sight into the work that we're doing. He was invited to be here today, so it's through his own choice that he's not here. And I think that reflecting on last year's kind of report, it would have been better had the partners been in the room at the time, because I think that there were some questions that were asked that we've since covered in other scrutiny sessions where there was actually better answers, and we could have offered some assurance in some of those areas, but the fact that Ian was here on his own put him in a difficult position to be able to do that. So I think that there's been a real step change, and I really look forward to the next time that we're sitting in this position, because I can really feel that the future is looking bright for the partnership.
Can I just extend that a little bit further? I just don't want anybody to leave the room thinking it's a negative that Ian's not here. Actually, I think it's an absolute positive that he's saying that the delegated safeguarding partners are there front and centre, and actually his role is to be the independent scrutineer and not to be one of us. And with that in mind, we very much felt that we should be here, and he was right to say, no, on this occasion I'm not going to attend. I think that's a really important point.
It is, and thank you for that. Like I say, it is encouraging, but he, you know, Mr. Vernell wasn't backward in coming forward last time about his criticism of the partnership and in writing. And actually, given his title of independent scrutineer, he is the person, or one of the few people, that could really help this group in understanding where we are, where we've been, and perhaps where we're moving to in the future. There was also a promise around data, and I know that that is covered in this report, because it feels, and I don't mean this in a negative context, but it feels a bit anecdotal at the moment, with people saying it feels better and the partnership has a better understanding. Yet we talk about efficiency of protecting and safeguarding young vulnerable people, yet we still don't have any tangible data that we can look to or point towards to support any of that. So whilst it is encouraging to hear what you say, it would have been useful, I think, certainly from my perspective, to have that independent scrutineer, as his title suggests, in indicating what his scrutiny has actually found over the last 12 months. Sorry, Bernie, you wanted some more.
I think, Chair, that the report speaks to that in terms of the tone and content, and I think that certainly the accountability and responsibility for responding to challenges from this group does sit with the three of us. Ian's report for the year is his reflections. I think it has a more positive tone than the one that you considered previously, and I would suggest that Ian's responsibility, if he's got issues and concerns in respect of failures, now would come to us, and we would be responding to you as a scrutiny committee if we didn't feel that we had met our duties and responsibilities well. In terms of data, there is data available, and some of it is contained in the report, but in terms of next year, there should be a more specific shared data set that will be available to accompany the report in terms of key numbers. They don't always tell the richness of the story that sits behind it, but that will be available as we move through the developments and the increased focus on intelligence and shared data sets.
Thank you for that. I'll open it up. Councillor Eaglin.
I'd like to ask you a couple of questions, please. First and foremost, when you go to your meetings, how often do you meet as a partnership?
There's a range of meetings.
I mean, when you all three get together.
Oh, quite often. In terms of the safeguarding partnership meetings, so the actual main partnership meet on a quarterly basis, but there are a number of other groups and meetings that we attend together to talk about data, to talk about practice improvements. There's a range of meetings, including the Children's Improvement Board, that we're all present at.
I appreciate you're new in post, so I understand you're sort of speaking from a different point of view. How do you put your agenda together? And do you report what goes on here amongst us in the council, who are responsible for the people out there who vote for us? How do you put your agenda together?
Well, the agenda is put together collaboratively in terms of what the emerging issues are, what we're focusing on. So one item might be the shared performance data set. There might be reports on child safeguarding practice reviews. There might be reports on particular complex practice issues that are emerging. If there's a particular issue, I'll use exploitation as an example. There might be something happening and we have a conversation about that. But the agendas are prepared kind of in the round, and we may prepare items for the next agenda in the meeting, depending on what's emerging. But there are kind of thematic areas that would be on the agenda all the time. We can share agendas if that's helpful to the scrutiny panel. We can share those.
Could I just add a little bit more information? So I think really, really importantly, although formally we meet on a quarterly basis now, we were previously meeting more frequently than that. And most importantly, we're meeting on a fortnightly basis as 3 delegated safeguarding partners. So we have a very definite catch-up meeting just to make sure that we're absolutely aware of. It's normally currently about ongoing cases, but actually anything else that's relevant to our agenda will be picked up and can be picked up through those meetings. There's a whole plethora, as you imagine, through all 3 different organisations of other meetings where we either come together or have internal meetings. And every organisation from a governance point of view has got a route through. So in terms of today, I, for example, will take a paper, there'll be a paper or reference to this meeting and the outcomes of today's meeting to our health safeguarding group, which we have internally within the Integrated Care Board. That in turn will then go up to Quality and Safety Committee, and reference to the outputs will go into the board report as part of the bigger quality report to say this is what we're doing from a safeguarding point of view now, so that everybody is feeding that through their own organisations as well as all the partnership work that we're doing. So just important to put a bit more meat on the bones, for want of a more professional phrase there, just a little bit more information there.
Thank you very much.
Can I just off there? I think it's really important as well, and the difference, I suppose, that I would reflect on in the past 12 to 18 months around the effectiveness of this collective group of partners at stepping up when there is a significant issue that's happening here and now for a child, for example, in the community. So very quickly, this partnership pulls together at a strategic level to really deal with some quite, I suppose, frontline issues, but that are really complex, carry real significant risk to them, and where maybe in the past, at more of a tactical level, would have been kind of leading on that work and then reflecting on what's gone on in the governance process. But I think that there is a real grip in this partnership now around those really risky issues, and that real willingness to forget about remits when the time is right to do that, and to collectively come together to really work as an effective partnership to safeguard children when they need us most.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Just on that point, though, wouldn't you expect, given the agencies that you represent, that the ability to come together quickly at times of crisis is historically one that the police have always done, the NHS, and to a degree also the local authority. I think just following on, though, from that sort of day-to-day making the approach to what must be the majority of interventions that we have with young people, hopefully, and not crisis, at times of crisis. And you'll forgive me, but the police chair it, and they've been to less than half of the meetings and 2% of the training. That doesn't strike me as being a particularly. Forgive me for having a go at the police. It was my old employer, so I don't know.
on that. So just to take the chair of the partnership meeting, that was me during this period. So 4 out of the 6 meetings. So I missed 2 in the year. That was no, but I am quite happy to be accountable for it. So I missed 2 during the year. One when I was on annual leave, and 1 I had a commitment that I couldn't get out of. Like today, for example, where I am the 4th silver for the day. Just to talk through the training, because it was the same with the low number in the last report. And I think it's really important to talk about the improvement journey that Staffordshire Police has been on in the child protection space. So I personally have led on the vulnerability training, and last year, as an example, in the autumn, we covered child sexual abuse and had a full day of training for 750 of our frontline staff. We've captured others outside of that, but that was face-to-face, large-scale, where we used case studies, we used the learning from our CSPRs around making sure that we really get that learning loop back in the system. In addition to that, we've had training around FGM, female genital mutilation. We've had training around honour-based abuse. And also, during about 18 months ago, we had a really experienced member of our specialist child protection team that was retiring. So we've re-employed her as a child protection support around the development of our staff. So it isn't the 2%. We do our own level 1 child protection safeguarding training in the force as well, whereas this will be captured during those numbers on that training. So there is reasons as to why that percentage looks so low for policing, because once you kind of go above the level 2 and you start looking into that kind of level 3, level 4 type training, that would then only be our specialist child protection teams, which is a smaller number of our staff when you look at the way that the rest of the partnership may use that. So I just wanted to be clear about that because it came out last year as well.
No, thank you for that. And again, thank you for the clarification. Bernie.
Chair, I think next year, I've just made a note of that, it will be useful to incorporate the data from single agency training as well to give you assurance that it's not that people aren't being trained, it's just where that crossover is in relation to multi-agency training. I'm not a fan of percentages because they don't tell you, you need to know whether there's 100 people, 500 people, and also out of that, how many staff in total have been trained at different levels. So I think next year we'll try and refine that so that it gives you a bit more detail of the other interfaces into that training.
Thank you. I think that's really encouraging. A recurring criticism, though, of how we safeguard children is very often something called co-production, which you probably know more about than I do. But I think that then lends itself to better partnership, joined-up training, doesn't it? And I appreciate the effort that's been made to train individual police officers. But I think if we are to move forward effectively tackling and protecting young people, then that co-production stuff, which must be harder to do, is also vitally important. Councillor Edgeller.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, you talked a lot about training, but I'd like to know where this training goes, whether people had the training actually. And I'm talking about schools, and it's probably a question for Heather actually. You know, children with coming from dysfunctional backgrounds, and they're in school and they're suffering from mental health and that. What do we actually do to help those children, you know, to safeguard them, you know, with the dysfunctional families and everything? That's one question. And the other question I'd like to ask, it's probably a question for the police, and that's about, we have a lot of children in our care that's in the criminal justice system and going to you know, the young offenders, you know. So what do we do to safeguard them as they're coming out to help them so they don't go back into reoffending? So I'd just like those 2 questions. Thank you.
With the Youth Justice one, so the Youth Justice one is actually covered through the Youth Justice Management Board. There's a crossover between Youth Justice and Safeguarding, obviously. And I sit on the Youth Justice Board as well as the Safeguarding Partnership as do colleagues, so there's a crossover. And one of the areas of improvement in the Youth Justice Plan was the principle of resettlement, which is how you support young people who are exiting custody back into communities. So there's quite a big piece of work going on in that space. and I've got a meeting in the next couple of weeks with the Governor of Warrington, which is obviously on our patch, and I'm arranging to go in and visit. The board have actually had a meeting, the partnership have had a meeting in Warrington to discuss some of our young people, but more widely, the youth justice teams are working really hard in their plans, in their approaches to resettlement, to ensure that we do support children and young people to re-enter communities, but there's issues that will be relevant for those of you that operate in the district councils around access to housing and accommodation. Not everybody is a fan of supporting young people exiting custody into accommodation, and also employment. So it's really important for young people to be able to access employment opportunities and housing opportunities, good quality housing opportunities as they exit custody. And so there's a big piece of work going on in the Youth Justice Board around that issue. So I would want to assure you that there is quite detailed work going on to ensure that we reduce the likelihood of reoffending for some of our young people, really important, and that they have wraparound support from both the Youth Justice Service, but as they then transition into adulthood, from the probation service, who obviously then take responsibility for them if they're still in an offending context, or if they're out on licence, for example.
And then if I just go back to the first part of the question, and I'm going to be completely honest and say I'm not going to talk for very long, because I'm very aware that you've got a whole presentation on education after this one, and our links are without doubt really, really strong. But I think the important points to say are that from a safeguarding point of view and from our partnership point of view, although education are no longer a statutory partner, we have maintained, or not a statutory partner, we have maintained really strong working relationships and continue to work on strengthening those further, to make sure that we are picking up on opportunities to learn from and with education. But of course, everybody who works in the school environment will have safeguarding training. So all schools have their safeguarding leads, their identified, delegated, designated, I don't know what we call them in schools, educational safeguarding leads anyway, and they all have access to the training programs, and they do have support, and there are links obviously to other professional groups. So for example, you talked about children with mental health problems, they'll have direct links into mental health services and to support mechanisms should they need them. There's also links to things like the health visitor programme, lots of other activities that go on. So I think what I'm trying to say is, from a reassurance point of view, they're not over there, they're not outside of what we're doing, despite the fact that education is no longer part of the partnership meeting, and we continue to work with them. And I'm sure when colleagues pick up the presentation in the next agenda item, they'll be able to reinforce and underline some of that information in much more detail than I probably can sitting here right now.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wong.
Thank you, Chair. Did I hear it right that the number of meetings is being reduced from a number to 4? Is that correct?
The frequency, but the length's been increased to accommodate further, more detailed discussion. Okay. And of course, we're supplementing that with a whole load of additional meetings outside of the main partnership meeting.
So we are meeting on a fortnightly basis as the designated safeguarding partners, but the larger group, the board, which is not unusual for boards, are meeting on a quarterly basis. And if we needed to meet because there was an emerging issue, we would stand up another meeting.
Okay. And as the Chair's mentioned, the report last year was quite critical, the independent scrutineer's report at least. And there were a number of concerns raised by this scrutiny committee. One of the comments that continues to be in the report, and I think this is repeated from last time, it talks about the fact that the delegated safeguarding partner needs to clearly set the vision and direction of the partnership and agree focusing on a smaller number of refreshed priorities. Now, the reason why I asked the question about frequency of board meetings is that I suppose in order to set that vision, presumably you need to have sufficient time in order to set the vision. If in fact Ian is right and that the vision hasn't been set for the last year, is there an issue with time and focus on this meeting to ensure that you can clearly set the vision and set the priorities of the board?
No, I think is the short answer. I think there's been a lot of work done in setting that time aside under the new working together arrangements to explore what the new vision is and the priorities. And we've got a meeting off the top of my head. I can't remember when it is, but it's within the next month to really get into the how we're going to collate the multi-agency data set and how we've obviously got, I think, as Heather said, a refresh of all of the vision, the documentation, which is being launched in December. Now, the reason that it's being launched in December is because everything is being rebranded, and there's a whole kind of comms plan that's sitting behind that in terms of rebranding the name, because we're moving from a board to a partnership. But there's been a lot of effort and time spent around the focus of, well, what is that vision, what does it need to look like? And so I would want to assure you that enough time has been allocated to it. It obviously is a critical area of business for all three of us.
It's reassuring to hear. Hopefully, presumably we'll get another report next year, and that sort of phrase used by Ian, which I've seen twice, won't be in the report, right? Because presumably by December, we're going to have a set, clear vision which shows the priorities of the board or the partnership as it is now. So I suppose we need to just make sure we look out for that. It's my concern that it's been repeated twice, so it's kind of, why is it in there in the first place? That's my only criticism, but that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for that. One of the previous criticisms, ongoing criticism, and I'm sure it come as no great surprise, is that there's always these difficulties around partner agencies sharing information, relevant information that keeps young people safe and safeguards them, of course. That was a criticism last year. As the partnership, are you happy that we do have effective information sharing now between the partnership?
Well, certainly as a relative new arrival, having worked in other areas, I think the level of dialogue and partnership information sharing is strong. I haven't been aware of any occasions since I've been in post where there's been issues about sharing information about individuals. Working together as a piece of legislation allows all partners to share information where there is a risk to a child, and so it's really important that that kind of is reinforced with partner agencies and more widely in terms of with schools or other agencies. But generally, I can speak for my experiences. There doesn't seem to be an issue with that information sharing.
So I think information sharing did come up in our 21 child protection inspection for the force. And I think that working together has reiterated the point around sharing information at the earliest opportunity. So whilst we've had MASH arrangements that have been well established since around about 2011, I think it was, that is around the statutory kind of space. So where we're looking for that kind of tier 3, tier 4 level of concern. But around that information sharing in the districts, with all of our kind of, for that early intervention and prevention work, we are still doing work on that. It does happen, but I think that the family hub model gives us a really good opportunity to make sure that, for example, police harm reduction hubs, that are in all our local policing teams in the districts, have got really strong links to those family hubs, so that we're making sure that we're identifying risk at the very earliest opportunity and that children and their families are getting the right help and support at the right time. So I think that that is a piece of work that's ongoing at the moment. Work really closely with Natasha Moody from the local authority around how we're doing that. So again, I think that will be a really good model when we've absolutely landed it consistently, that we really are sharing information at that earliest opportunity to prevent escalation and to get that right help and support.
I'd just be interested to hear from the NHS as well, because we did have several cases, of course, where young, vulnerable people, I think from a serious case review, I understand they call them different things now, but of young children who suffered here at the hands of their parents, and they were sent for dental checks, I think, and didn't turn up, and so they were immediately removed from lists and various other things. And that was cited as a criticism of the way the partnership worked. I accept it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, thank you. Really, really important. And I think the thing I'd start by saying is the NHS is a very complex organisation, as I'm sure you understand. I am Caldecott Guardian for the Integrated Care Board, which means I'm the person that patient identifiable information has to pass through, or the authority to share that has to pass through, with regard to information that we are directly responsible for in the Integrated Care Board, which is very, very limited. We work, as you know, with a number of provider organisations, so our Mental Health Trust, our Acute Trust, our community providers. Each of those organisations have their own arrangements. But actually the scenario, the improving scenario that both Bernie, I've forgotten your name for a second there. That is awful, Nikki. It's my menopause brain, I do apologise. Sometimes it just fogs up. But that Bernie and Nikki, who I've worked with for a very long time, incidentally, have shared is absolutely right in that there is that improvement happening, and we are not seeing the same level of resistance. So, for example, historically, many, many years ago, it wouldn't have been unusual for information to get stuck at, say, a GP level or a dental practice level. Now we've got mechanisms in place that have strengthened the release of that information, and all partners within the ICB, all of our health partners take their responsibility for contributing to the rapid response to safeguarding concerns equally importantly. And any challenge, of course, would then get escalated up to me, and I would pick that up with individual organisations as required. So hopefully that provides some assurance that we've moved on from that time.
No, it does. Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't think there are any further questions. No. Thank you again. Thank you for the report. Really useful. I have to say a marked difference from the report that we had last year. And because of the positive note of the report, I think we all welcome it, and it does sound very much like we're on the right track, although there's probably still work to be done. We look forward to seeing what the reduced number of priorities will be in December, and also look forward to the next report. So thank you again for all the efforts in keeping some of the most vulnerable young people in our communities safe. Thank you. Right, moving on then to item 5, recommissioning options for children's community support, including domiciliary care. Does everyone know everyone, or do we need to go around again? Is it Lisa?
Hi, it's Lisa Mason. I'm the Commissioning Manager for Children's Social Care.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton, did you want to open up?
Yes, will do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. This paper is about a recommissioning of the children's community support. So, as Lisa's introduced herself, she's a commissioning manager who directly does this, and Natasha Moody, which you've all met, is the AD for Wellbeing and Partnerships. And we have a presentation which will explain what's quite a detailed paper. I think I think quite well, which Natasha will go through very shortly. But basically, why are we here today and why is this happening? Well, this is an ongoing commissioning arrangement, and like all commissioning arrangements, it coming to an end, and it comes to an end in the end of next year. So we're getting quite early with this. So that's when the current arrangements expire. And this gives us an opportunity to look at how Commission look at those opportunities, look to try and do things even better than they are being done at this moment in time, but within the same sort of envelope financially. And this contract allows different levels of support, but through one sort of framework, and it gives us a wide range of providers. The paper and the and the presentation will detail the rationale why we're looking to do what we are. Obviously, would like comment and scrutiny around that. And within the paper, there is an example of what this service is about, to give an even better, I think, understanding, and then rationale to why we've come to the particular option. So if that's okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll hand over to Natasha, and Lisa will be able also to answer any really technical questions about the actual provision.
Morning everybody. So I've just got a few slides which I'll run through to start us off. Conscious that community support might not be something people are familiar with. It is something that's been to this committee before, but I know that there are some new members who will just kind of help you understand the framework a little bit better to start with. So for those of you that don't know, Stafford County Council's got a statutory duty to deliver children's community support. We do that under a framework, so that's the technical procurement term for the way in which we commission those services to external providers. That arrangement's been in place since April 2022, and we currently have 28 providers delivering across 4 different lots, which we'll talk to you a little bit about in a minute. Because the contract comes to an end in September 2025 and the value of that contract is above 2 million, it requires Cabinet approval. And as Mark said, that also provides us with an opportunity to think about how we might do things differently. So we wanted to make sure that Scrutiny Committee had got the capacity and the ability to comment and give us any feedback that you might have before it goes through the Cabinet process. The framework is available for children aged 0 to 18 and was largely built for children who've got learning disabilities and autism, but we will talk to you about how we're slightly adapting it this time. So the way in which the framework's built is under a lotting structure. So it means that we have different providers providing different aspects of services and support. And we've just outlined what they are. Now, Lot 2, 3 and 4 are statutory requirements. Lot 1 is non-statutory. But actually, we'll come on to later why we think that's so important in terms of making sure that we retain that as a lot. And the way this service and support is provided is very different from other stuff that we commission. So it's provided on the back of a children's social worker from the disability team going out to meet with the child, young person and family, assessing their needs and making sure that they meet the statutory criteria in legislation for accessing this service and support. And so what we do is make sure that as part of that plan we've got a clear understanding of the need, and then we make sure that we wrap that need around them. We also make sure that it supports our overall kind of strategic aims in terms of making sure that people are resilient and independent, so that actually, even though they might have learning disabilities or autism, that actually they're supported to live as independently as they can do into adulthood. I have to say, I was thinking about this kind of yesterday. This is the second time I've been with this framework. And actually, I think when I was reflecting upon the work that Lisa and the team have done, I have to say, I think they've done an incredible job at delivering some real benefits for the County Council on this framework. So, as Mark said, the value of the contract is still £3 million. They've actually had a 207% increase in the number of children who are being supported through that framework. But in actual fact, the cost has remained the same, and that's because they're getting such good value with the providers that have been commissioned. Now, I'm not sure how much people do or don't know about the care market, but the market itself can be quite difficult and quite challenging. So, for example, one of the changes that we're going to make is largely around the capacity and capability of the sector to meet our demands at an affordable price. So I think kind of securing that through this framework is really, really important. there's really good oversight from the team in terms of not only do you see it through a practitioner lens, through the care planning process, through the social worker, you also see a commissioner kind of monitoring that service and support on a regular basis. And you also have input from regulators. So these providers are regulated by both Ofsted and the CQC and the Home Office in some instances. The provision is very much based on the child's need. It's very much focused around the child's need and wrapped around their support. So we'll talk to you later about an example of a child who's accessed some support. And I think that's one of the strengths of this contract. I think there's better choice and quality for providers. And again, hopefully you'll see that through the case study that we've provided. But actually, it has absolutely helped some of our children not need more intensive support. So we have a small number of children who end up coming into our care with a disability. And I think a lot of that is credit to this contract that helps people to remain supported and independent within their own home and family environment first and foremost. And a large proportion of our children are moving into adulthood, so 21% plan to move, and we hope that that life skills and independence lot supports them to move into adulthood, feeling prepared for their journey into adulthood. And as I said, at this moment in time, we've got 208 children in receipt of community support. So, you know, at any one time that can change, but at the moment, this moment in time in August, that's where we were at. So I think since the last contract came, there's been a number of changes. One of the very small changes that's been made is that the commissioning for community support and the commissioning of children coming into care both sit within the same team now. And I think on the back of that, there's been much closer conversations in our internal teams around the needs for children coming into care and where they relate to care that might be provided in the community. And so on the back of that, Lisa's been working really closely with the placements team to try and understand the demands that they might have and how that might be supported through the lot-in arrangement that we have. So for those of you that don't know, we'll have a number of children over the last year or two. Particularly, I think, after COVID, we've seen more, where we've got children with what's described as complex needs, but I don't think it is actually necessarily the complexity of the children's needs. I think it's the complexity of the system in which they find themselves in sometimes. But they will have quite challenging needs, and the partnership will be struggling to understand how they can maximise their outcomes without them coming into care. And so a lot of the support that Lisa's framework provide, some of those care providers, for example, have been providing some of that support to try and maintain our children at home with the right support wrapped around them. And in some instances, they've actually provided some of that care and support when children have come into our care as part of a wraparound model. So I think what that's led us to kind of reflect upon is whether or not the framework it wasn't established for that need, but it's becoming used more for that need. And so is there a need to kind of think more deeply really around how we make sure that the needs of complex children coming into care are met through that framework arrangement. What I would say as well is, and I suppose it kind of comes back to that earlier conversation around the value part, if I've got a child coming into care and I ring up any number of agencies on a Friday, I can guarantee you that I might have a quote that would make your eyes water in terms of the price of that care. Those agencies have to mobilise very quickly. We'll be using staff who are paid relatively low wages, but because of that model of care, it does cost a lot of money. And so really, this will be used to try and circumnavigate as much as possible the use of agency and use framework providers that can help provide some of that support, and have also got the skills and expertise to be able to provide that in a regulated way. The other improvement that we're making is, and kind of Lisa and I were reflecting on this the other day, that there's an increase in the number of children who are coming through with more complex physical disabilities like peg feeding, catheter management, for example. And again, on the back of those medical conditions requiring some specialist care and nursing, we want to adapt the framework to make sure that that's correctly managed and met. And also we're suggesting that there's a step-up, step-down proposal which enables practitioners to use it more effectively across that continuum of support. So, for example, at the moment, some of the other services that our team commission is things like Aiming High, HAF, and at the moment, a lot of those providers will say, when there's a child with real difficult physical needs, they'll say it's really difficult to manage that individual child alongside a cohort of maybe 30 other children. And so the proposal is that this framework helps them to have that independent support that they might need to be able to access universal provision within the community. So those are the things that kind of Lisa and the team have identified that they think they need to tweak and refine. But again, this is your opportunity really to give us some feedback on whether or not there are other things that you think we might need to reflect upon. And we thought it was always nice to kind of bring this back to the child and the difference we're making. I know last time we came, I think it was yourself who asked the question about, you know, how do we know the quality and the impact of the work that we're doing? And so we thought it might be quite nice to share a story about a child who's accessed some of the services and support. And I think what's quite nice, and again, Lisa might want to come in on this more than I would, but what's quite nice for me is that actually that support started where the child wasn't really coming out of his bedroom. And very quickly the staff were able to build that relationship with the child just through the regularity of attendance really, and having some of those conversations. And before long, it wasn't long until he was starting to say the members of staff's names and things like that. And then actually that's a picture of him on the right accessing community support, which he never would have done before some of this support was in place. So I think it's a credit to the providers themselves, but also to Lisa and the team for making sure that we are building that independence and resilience that those children need. And at the bottom there's a quote there from the mum who's provided some of that feedback to say how beneficial she found that support. So I think it's not for underestimating really the significance this support can have for families who are, you know, trying very hard to parent children who've got, you know, really profound disabilities in some instances. So I think that's it from us. It's over to you for any questions you might have.
Thank you for that. Councillor Geller.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for that presentation. But I have to say that I've had a case on my book, books for absolutely ages. It started way beginning in September, and I have a case from one of the residents and their child, and which I responded to and sent it on to what I thought was the right people. I've had since then, I've had several emails from these people, the parents, complaining they've had no results at all, no replies at all. The people that I have sent, have responded is Amy Challoner, Bruno Hansa, Tim Moss. They've all been notified of this complaint of these people, the children's parent, the child's parents. And I, together with the parents, and I could quote you emails that I've received since, that we've had no replies, no satisfaction at all, or no idea of where we're going with this, or any idea for the parents to seek any sort of satisfaction. So that is the only question.
I just wonder whether this is a specific issue maybe needs taking outside.
It's desperately now, Chairman, because I've done all I can on an email.
Yeah.
And I've responded to the parents, and I've got no replies from the people that I seek information from. I
can sense the frustration, but this is sort of a publicly transmitted meeting, isn't it? I just wonder, Natasha, whether we need to take this outside of the...
And if you send us through the details, we'll pick that up. I suppose the challenge that we've got is we're here today to talk about community support, which is part of that system of support, but it's probably not related to that individual complaint. But if you pass it on to me, I'm more than happy to pick it up with Tim, my colleague.
Thank you. Councillor Geller. Sorry, I think I confused matters originally.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, my question really relates back to, and I think it's a conversation that Mark and I had many years ago, actually, about early intervention. You know, I'm a big believer in that, you know, if we've got children in schools that's got some sort of knowledge of problems that, you know, with autism and what have you. I know you're all aware that we've got a member of staff, actually, whose son suffers from autism, and he's written a book, which I hope to have a conversation with the lady, but I'll put that on one side. And I'm concerned, you know, that if we start at nursery stage with children and picking up their problems and everything and helping them, you know, and this, I mean, that young man on there, I mean, he must be, what, 10, 11, 12, he's, you know, but I'm going back to early years, you know, and probably that young child would probably have benefited if he'd have been picked up earlier. So is there anything that we can do? within the education system where we can put people into nursery stages and what have you, where we can help these young people moving forward and work with the children at an early stage before they get into the teenage years and that. It would save an awful lot of money as well. So I'd like your thoughts on that, please. Thank you.
So I've just kind of put this earlier slide up. So this framework does work with a broader age range of children. The example we gave, as you said, was an older child. So it does work with children as early as we possibly can, really. So it really does depend when the children's disability social worker goes out to meet with the family, whether or not that's a required need. I'd be more than happy to come and spend as long as you need me to talking about early help and intervention, because I think you're absolutely right. There is lots of benefits of getting in earlier, and there is an awful lot of time, energy and effort that's put in the early years to make sure that children who've got identified disabilities are able to access that timely help and support that they need. So again, more than happy to pick that up, but I do want to assure you that actually this provision will offer support to those children.
Lisa?
Sorry, can I just add to that as well that although the support for that young gentleman that we featured, by the time that he'd come into community support, lots of other services had already been working with him. And as Natasha has alluded to, we do cross over to the SEND team, to the early help team, to the placements team, and the whole emphasis of the framework is that it's step up, step down. So whilst we're working with that family to help not just the young person, but the family as well, we're teaching them skills to be able to perhaps de-escalate behaviours and work with that young person. But we're also looking to step back when we can, so that perhaps that young person moves down the framework to have less support as they become more independent themselves. So there is this fluidity within the framework and across all of the services as well.
Councillor Sutton.
I just think it is important to note that what we're talking about here, and you know, and all that early stuff is really important, and it's really beneficial. But the actual contract here is where there is an assessed need, assessed by a social worker around that disability. So it's not, this contract isn't necessarily about that sort of lower level stuff that might be identified earlier. This is when children have got that statutory need and there's an assessment being made by a social worker, perhaps other than the life skills and independence bit, you know. And I don't take away from all the, you know, and you won't find anybody more supportive of that early intervention, that preventative stuff than me, as you alluded to, and from our conversations, you know. But the contract that we're providing here is not necessarily about that wider thing. It is about where there's that statutory assessment being done.
Did you want to come back, Anne, on that? Or no? Councillor Pardeshi.
Thank you, Chair.
Do you want to put the...
Thank you, Chair. I'm always in favour of in-house service delivery on the grounds of more control, more accountability, well-trained staff, consistency of the delivery of service, and most importantly, there's not that profit motive there. It's people before profit. And I know the report acknowledges that in-house service delivery does have its strengths and opportunities, but further investigation would be required. And I just wondered whether that's just a statement or whether any work is being done or will be done, hopefully on bringing about a point where it will be in-house service delivery at some point in the not too distant future. Thank you, Chair.
I suppose one of the options that we always consider is whether or not we should deliver the service ourselves in-house. I think the fluidity and the flexibility of the number of children that we're dealing with and the type of care that they need means that actually you couldn't have a member of staff delivering that support 37 hours a week, Monday to Friday, and it meet the needs of the family in the way that we can with an external provider. Now, a lot of those providers will be providing services and support for a lot of local authorities, so they can make it work because they've got that mixed market really across a number of different local authorities. So it's not always the best option for us to have staff that actually can't be mobilised really at the same time for multiple children. So it is certainly something that we will look at, but it's not necessarily something that I think will add value for this particular contract. I suppose the other thing to come back on in terms of that oversight, I mean, I've both delivered and commissioned services, and I think you can have you know, good staff internally and externally. I think you can have good, you know, management oversight internally and good monitoring of a contract externally. So I think there are, it's incumbent on us really to make sure that we have got that good management oversight and that we are monitoring that contract well. And actually we've got some level of assurance from the regulator that they're doing what they need to do. And I have to say, you know, and I'm not just saying this, the contract management of this provision is really tight. Lisa has done a really good job of making sure that we get the right providers on the framework, and we've increased that enormously this time. We've also made sure that actually there's good contract management conversations in place, so that actually where there is issues, we're identifying them, having those conversations and addressing them in a timely way. And so actually I am assured that the commission arrangement that we've got in this space is adding value. We have had some arrangements where they've been external, where you don't necessarily see the robustness of contract management that you might necessarily see for this contract. So I think there are pros and cons to both approaches. I think we need to evaluate both in that context. And we should never discount, you know, delivering something ourselves if actually we think it's providing a better service and support for children. But on this occasion, I think we would recommend that that wouldn't be the preferred model.
Thank you. Do you want to come back?
I think one of the advantages of this and the way we do it is what's provided requires quite a lot of variety of different types of service, different types of support, and particularly flexible, children coming in, coming out, and at different times of the day, and quite often for a lot of children probably at the same sort of times. So I do think it makes having an in-house staff of how many that would take really difficult to be able to offer that expertise and that flexibility across a whole broad range of stuff that's provided.
Thank you for that. Councillor Burnett-Faulkner.
Hello. One of my questions is how do we go on with children who are transitioning from primary school and the high school is out of county, it's in a different area. So I've got someone who's got an issue with this and school transport. They've always had school transport because mum doesn't, single parent, doesn't drive. It's an adopted child with autism and is now being told that he can't have transport and she can't get him to school. Then she's now going to get in trouble because she's not sending him to school. So how do we deal with that sort of situation with cross-county schools is my question really.
So if it's about community support, so if the child has got a social worker and they live in Staffordshire, that support will follow them even if they move outside of the county. So for example, if you've got a child who's going to Mary Hill Primary School or whatever it might be called now, and they move across to Ulsager, that support would follow them because they're a resident of Staffordshire. What that doesn't do, I suppose, is answer the question about the whole homeschool transport, because that would be a different service.
Let me just come back to you on this. So the child lives in, it's classed as Cheshire, but they've got a Staffordshire postcode, so they're like in no man's land.
It's wherever they pay the council tax to. So if it's Newcastle-under-Lyme District Council, it will sit with Staffordshire County. If they pay it to Cheshire, then it would be the responsibility of Cheshire. But this statutory framework for support is the same in both local authority areas, so I would encourage that parent to contact Cheshire East.
Thank you for that. Just one last one then, I think, from me, unless... Oh, sorry. Councillor Perry.
I've only just thought about it, listening to what everybody else has said. It's about supporting the contract, again, of the provision that's already been provided. It's all in the documentation. I'm pleased to see that referrals from 114 days down to 2, that's really good. Excellent, in my opinion, on that one. And I think if it's working, as we've seen on there, in those categories on there, then we should support the recommendation on there. you know, I've got nothing else to say because I've been listening to what all the people are saying, but I've brought it back to what we're supposed to be talking about, which is the provision and the contract again with the provider that's providing the provision at the moment, if that makes any sense at all, the P's. So I'm quite comfortable as we speak now. Obviously, if there's more to be added, then you can look at that, but you seem to have brought the costing down as well, reading through it, and also the time frame for referrals, which I think is excellent. Thank you.
Lisa, did you indicate you wanted to reply on that?
I just wanted to thank you for picking up those key points. That there's been a lot of work over the last couple of years, as Natasha said, to really focus on the contract management and quality of care in place. Thank you.
Councillor McMahon.
Thank you. I fully endorse the business of the fact that this is too much of a specialist area with small numbers. Therefore, you need to go with somebody who serves multiple local authorities in order to make the thing work, because there is an economies of scale here, or it is unworkable. The reason that the price has dropped to a third of what it was before in your report is due to the fact that there's far less use of out-of-contract providers, which makes perfect sense, because if you've got an out-of-contract provider, they think they've got you and they can charge what they like. The first question is, are you satisfied about the quality of the out-of-contract providers, as well as being rather, shall we say, exercised by the price? But the second thing is, looking at the numbers, there's been a 207% increase in the past few years over the statutory numbers. And year on year, those numbers are increasing. The last year it was 68%, I seem to think, from memory. Are we not in a position to say to any prospective provider, you have to have the capacity to cope with substantial increase? And if you can't guarantee that you're going to pick up whatever we throw at you, so we don't have to go to an out-of-contract provider, we'll go somewhere else. Thank you.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. So we have been really, really fortunate. As I said before, I do think Lisa and the team have done an amazing job of kind of making sure that they've addressed some of the issues that we're experiencing. And we have been really lucky that because we've had more providers on the framework, we have been able to source the support we need without using off-contract providers. Where we haven't been able to do that is where we've got children in care who might not necessarily have the complex disabilities, but might have need for care in the community to help prevent them coming into care. So I think that's one of the reasons for making the recommendation to change it, to include that as a lotted structure so that we have got that and can assure ourselves that we're not necessarily using those off-contract providers in the same way. I think I come back to my point before in terms of the quality of care. I think it can be mixed. I think you've got some very good staff who work for, agencies, but you can also have some staff that you wouldn't necessarily want providing that quality of care. But I do think you get a more robust response and a more robust standard, really, of expectation, really, when you enter into a contract arrangements and you're clear about what you want because you're on the front foot as opposed to the back foot, I think. And so, I'm assured that we have done everything we can to rectify the issues we've identified to make sure that we have got the right lotting structure. And I think because of the relationships that Lisa's developed with the providers, and I saw Lisa and the team at a market event the other day with the providers, I think she's been able to encourage more providers to be on the framework so that actually we don't get in a position where we're having to use off-contract provision, and can assure ourselves that we have got that quality and oversight.
Lisa?
Just to pick up on your other point in terms of them having the capacity, that is included in the contract. So we cover, obviously, the county's a wide area. We have quite a few rural areas within that where it's difficult to locate those care staff to. So all of the providers, when they tender to come on the contract, there are those conversations about what areas they're going to be working in to make sure we cover capacity.
So why can't you insist that we don't go to any out-of-contract providers?
We don't know.
Well, we don't use them if they can meet need. So for example, at the moment, the providers, in all fairness, would say, you haven't got a lotting structure or a specification that's been set up for children with complex care needs. And that's what we're trying to rectify through the process. We'll have a lotting structure that is set up so that providers can bid for it. We are dependent really on the market coming back and saying they will meet need. But we absolutely, if we've got a lotting structure for it and we've built the relationship with the providers and we've encouraged enough people on, like we have done with this existing framework, there should be no reason why we'd be using off-contract providers. It's just because we hadn't had that need at that particular time.
Yep, thank you. I was just trying to get my head around that. Just on that point then, I think you talked about there was clear evidence of that sort of hugely worthwhile benefit from this framework. But you also said that the framework wasn't designed to deliver what it was delivering. And I think there was a suggestion that there were some huge collateral benefits to that. You then said that it's now very tight. Does that mean that we've lost those collateral benefits? Is it tight around the statutory requirements, the 3/4, and does that reflect in our selection of providers?
So when the framework was first established, it was set up based on the fact that we've got a Children's Disability Commissioner who was looking at it through the lens of what do children with disability need, and what does the statutory duties tell us we have to do. That work where we've been working across the system has helped us to identify that actually these same care providers could be used for children who need our care and support. And actually, if we wrapped some of that support around them in the family home, then we might not bring them into our care because actually they'd be supported in the community. So that's the bit we didn't, you know, when we first designed this, we didn't do it with that lens on, and actually that's the perspective we've now got because of that whole system working. So that's the thing we're changing and adapting. And in terms of the tightness, it's really about that robust contract monitoring. When this framework was set up before, we were in a very different position in terms of the market stake. So we had a really small number of providers last time we came to speak to you. We hadn't necessarily got well-developed relationships with those providers. And sometimes because of that, we'd go out for some support and providers wouldn't come back to bid for that support or wouldn't be able to deliver it. You know, we might have, for example, really good coverage in the north and not necessarily the same in the south. Since that last framework went through, which was in 2022, and Lisa and the team have been working really hard to develop those relationships, we've seen much more interest from providers. Like I say, 28 providers now. That is an incredible increase compared to what it was last time. And also a better take-up, really, when we're going to them for care and support needs, they're able to meet needs, which is why we're having different conversations with them to say, do you know what, we think you'd be really good at entering into this market, and can we use this framework as an opportunity to do that? So that's why we started that early conversation with the market to say, this is how we're thinking of tweaking and evolving it, because this is a need we've identified and we think you can help us to meet that.
Thank you for that. I think there's any other questions. Mark, did you want to finish?
No, not really. I think it's been summed and explained reasonably well. Just wanted to thank committee for their questions and the support going forward.
No, thank you for that. And I think the report and asking the questions and having the presentation and the explanations, it certainly makes me feel that the option and the choice is the right one from what I can see of this. So that must have taken a lot of time and effort to put together. So thank you to whoever did that. Mark.
Just one other point. I just wanted a little bit of feedback, perhaps, on the fact that the use of, it doesn't matter. I mean, I think we all find reading reports, pages and pages of reports, and they have to be officially done like that, can be sometimes a little bit difficult and time-consuming. And I think we all lose track of it. I certainly do sometimes. The use of a brief presentation like that with examples, we think is a good idea going forward, because it gives everybody, and you know, if I read that and then read the paper, it's much easier to read the paper when you've seen something like that. So it was just a question: are you happy with that type of presentation when my office come with this?
I think most people are saying yes. I also find it really useful to have that table of pros and cons. Normally we end up reading through hundreds of paragraphs, and I think when you have that comparative table, that really does make a difference. Councillor McMahon.
I don't know how this would work in reality, but having the presentation before you have to delve into the thing would be particularly helpful, because you're right, it is like trying to wade through treacle sometimes, particularly with something as complex as this paper. And I don't know how we do it, but having a pitted a sort of short presentation such that at least we know what the principles are before we delve into the detail, I think would be helpful.
Thank you again. Thanks for coming.
Snape.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone coming back. Can I just clarify, for the sake of the camera, I'm told I didn't have my microphone on when I invited everyone to take a drink. So for those watching, I do apologise, but everyone's back. We'll move on to item 6 and managing self-neglect. Jeremy, did you want to open?
Thank you. Very briefly, as the new Cabinet Member for Health and Care, I thought that it made sense to start by running a slide rule over various areas of the portfolio, notwithstanding the reputation of those people who followed before me, both as members and officers. As part of that assessment, what I've looked at extensively, and what I think the two reports in front of you this morning show, is an assessment of the culture. And I think these two reports really demonstrate, a culture of collaborative working, learning and education and training, and one of continuous improvement. And I'm going to pass over to Paul, who is going to cover more of the detail and the areas. But I just thought it was worth saying that as the new portfolio holder in that area, I thought it was important to do that and just to reflect that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Northcote, were you going to take us through the report?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair and Councillors. I'll keep it brief, because I'm aware of the time. The first item is to do with self-neglect. Why we're bringing it here today is just requesting that the committee considers this aspect, because it's not high in the priorities. It's number 7 in terms of the safeguarding aspects, but it's important to understand there's a differentiation between what's section 42 and also that you can read further in the report before I hand over to my colleague on the left there, that we need a steer from yourselves where we need to perhaps go in the future, to how we can steer and shape this, and also to make sure that we're giving you that feedback and information that you are seeking as members. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Ruth, who will take you through the report. Thank you, Chair.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you all again. Thank you for inviting me here today to talk particularly about self-neglect. As Councillor Northcote has said, self-neglect doesn't often feature within Section 42 inquiries, and you'll see from the report that actually it's not that common. It isn't common throughout the country. However, national data highlights the fact that for safeguarding adult reviews, so those reviews that have been completed in the most significant of incidents, 60% relate to concerns about self-neglect. Also, what we know locally is that self-neglect is actually very difficult to identify within the early stages, where we would hope to be able to do more preventative work, because these are often people that aren't in contact with services or who won't engage with us, and at that time those risks might not be as high. What we have also said locally as well is that actually we've had a recognition that the training and guidance for our practitioners hasn't been where it's needed to be, and that's been demonstrated through 2 of the most recent SARS. One that we've spoken about, I think, here previously, which was for Andrew, which was a Stoke-on-Trent individual, but more recently Gillian, a SAR relating to Gillian, who was in fact a Staffordshire resident. So really brings it home to us about those areas that we should be looking to improve on, and hopefully within the report you will have identified those areas that we have been focusing on recently and will be focusing on going forward. So because I've been told I talk a lot, I'm actually now going to invite you all for questions so that I don't talk as much as I can.
Thank you for that. Maybe I could start. We see the definition of this, don't we, quite regularly when it comes to adult safeguarding, is there's always a caveat at the end that says We get involved only if we think that the individual can't protect themselves. I just wonder what sort of difficulties that creates when it comes to adult safeguarding, particularly around that sort of longitudinal threat and risk picture and assessment that says you might be able to protect yourself from yourself now, but can you protect yourself in a week's time, a month's time, a year's time? And also the other issue for me, when I read through some of these things, would I be right in assuming that very often self-neglect is a symptom of another form of abuse, whether it be domestic abuse and people then suffer in that way? So whilst it might only be number 7, I do wonder whether it is a symptom of other things. I fully accept these are very difficult and challenging things to try to get right. I just wondered if we are happy, in inverted commas, that we have the right processes in place to be able to do that.
Thank you. So on the first point with regards to ability to protect themselves, this is always actually, I think we've spoken about this before, can be quite difficult without really speaking with people and getting to know them to really understand that. So I did write within the report around the fact that when it comes to self-neglect, if people aren't engaging with services, we'll take that actually that they're not able to protect themselves. Therefore, we will complete the Section 42 inquiry. So in some ways, this is all, I won't say easier because that really isn't the word, but it is actually, it gives us a structure in which we can work around. It also means that we often will complete an assessment with somebody before we'll determine that, which again, actually that intervention in itself can help us better assess and address the risk. But where people are maybe not engaging with our assessment process, or maybe then subsequently aren't engaging with the care that's been provided for them, maybe as well aren't engaging well with health services as well, which is again another area where actually they might have had longer term involvement with health than they have with us. So it's around that side of us to help us to determine their ability to protect themselves in the future. So actually, I think gives us quite a good framework to work around that ability to protect themselves. I actually find the hardest part of this is that element of proportionality. So how much should we interfere in somebody's life when they're asking us not to? But again, balancing that against our duty to protect people from abuse and neglect. And that's the area that our practitioners particularly struggle around, and links in then as well with the difficulty around assessing capacity in line with the Mental Capacity Act, but also thinking about best practice around executive capacity, so somebody's ability to actually do what they say they can do, when actually we maybe don't have the evidence that even though they can tell us what they need to do, they don't act upon that. Hence some of that work we're doing and the tools that we're putting into the new guidance to support practitioners with determining that. Does that cover that first part of your question? Thank you. And so then coming on as to whether self-neglect is potentially a feature within other types of abuse, I absolutely think it can be. We're more likely to maybe find elements of other types of abuse when we start looking into concerns of self-neglect, more than we would do find self-neglect when we're looking into other concerns of abuse and neglect. Because quite often people maybe have been financially abused, or there's emotional abuse, as you say, from a partner, from a domestic abuse situation, which has maybe led to some of that self-neglect. Actually, what we tend to find, self-neglect is more prevalent for people that have maybe suffered a bereavement, have concerns relating to alcohol or drug misuse, because actually this is situational, because of their mental health and their well-being. So that's where we tend to find the prevalence is, and that reluctance then as well to engage with services because they fear that response. We're doing a lot of work as well around shame, because shame features quite a lot, both within concerns of self-neglect, but also for people who have been a victim of domestic abuse as well. So people's reluctance to talk to us about how they feel because they feel shame associated with that. So we're looking at the training we can give staff so that they can better engage with people and have those sensitive conversations to help people feel supported in the right way.
Sorry, Councillor Burnett-Faulkner.
Morning, Ruth. One thing I'd like to say is we've got to be very careful, and I don't know how you're going to deal with this, is by not taking people's independence away. Because once you start doing that, I think they go down a slippery slope. And something that we might think is neglect, they don't think is neglect. For example, years ago, you would get someone who would, their routine has always been that they have a bath once a week and that's it. And they wash their hair and have a bath once a week. And now we're trying to tell them they should be showering daily. But that's not what they want to do, and it's not what they've always done. So how do we define that they're neglecting themselves or take their independence away from them by not insisting that they have the shower daily? Then they're quite happy with their bath weekly. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I think it is an absolutely important point, and I always use the example of my own children who, when they were younger, actually didn't see the value in bathing at all, and just to tackle them into the bath was something. And it didn't impact on their well-being. They were quite happy. It might have impacted on mine, and certainly I've got 2 boys, so just imagine the teenage smell. And I think that it is something as well around our differences in background and in our own experiences. You know, my mum grew up in a household where they had a bath outside, you know, and the bath was filled up actually only fortnightly, and they all got in one after another. And actually there's still an element of that for her now. And I do think of that when she gets older as to how people might see judgment around, as I call it, the colour of her feet. We often joke about it. That to me is where it's important to understand the person's story, to get to know the person. And this is where we need to be supporting practitioners to be able to take the time, to be able to go out there and get to know them, and to do this slowly, and to not make judgment on people's practices. This is also relevant when we work with people where they may have different heritages, which again may come with different practices, for example, which may seem strange or unusual to us, but actually a part of their cultural heritage for which we need to be respectful of. So it is around that training, it's around that support, and it's around looking at giving people effective, as I call it as well, you know, that sort of risk assessment approach. A lot of things that people don't do aren't going to lead necessarily to harm. So it's around the impact, and also whether there's been a change in behaviour for this person. I worked with people who had never had running water in their home, and although that was a shock, even, you know, obviously back in the early 2000s, it wasn't uncommon in the area of, you know, rural Staffordshire where they lived as farmers and had chosen to live that way. So it's around that understanding and not casting those judgments. But as I say as well, it's around the practitioners having the time to understand that from the person's perspective.
Councillor Northcott.
Thank you, Chairman. And just to humanise your question just a little bit more, taking that holistic view of a resident when they're in that position, that a structure is sometimes necessary because they're self-neglecting, they can also lead down the road of isolation, becoming withdrawn from services, withdrawn from people, and having that structure where there's maybe a bath involved or something else that's, that they may need, encourages people to come out of themselves and to engage again. So it's having that balance and making that risk assessment, which Ruth has made, to humanise that every single case matters, and to understand the patient fully before going in there. This is triggered a point. We need to go in there gung-ho, but to assure you that, that's the way we want it to go. That's the way we want it, and that's the way it needs to go.
Please do.
So it's not just the bath thing, though. It's like older people have like a set routine. Like I've got my dad, he's 97. He lives on his own, he does everything himself, and he copes quite well. And his routine is every morning at 11:15, he goes out and he goes down the road and he catches the bus into town. He goes and buys himself a couple of slices of meat or an oat cake for his tea or whatever, and he'll go to Wetherspoons, have his dinner and half a lager shandy or whatever, and then he catches the bus home. And that's his routine. And if I ring him up and say, Dad, I'm coming over with you shopping at 11 o'clock, he say, no, I'm not in then, I'm going to be out. And that's what he does. And I think that's fantastic that he's got that independence and he can do that. And I mean, I do go down there and I think, oh, the floor could do with a mop and this could do with doing and that. But I tend to go and do jobs like that when I know he's out, because he won't let me do it and he will be offended if he knew that I was going in and doing that for him. And I think that's something we need to be very careful about when we're assessing these people and that as well, because sometimes they'll agree with things when they're with you in the room, and then as soon as you've gone, they'll say, that person came interfering in my lifestyle, telling me what to do and how to do things. I've been on this earth a lot longer than they have, etc., etc. You've heard the story millions of times. And I think we ought to be appreciative that a lot of our elderly population are quite capable of being independent for most things, and just be there for them if we need them. Don't push anything on them that they don't need.
I couldn't agree more, you know, and I too have a, not quite that old, but a 92-year-old grandma who I mustn't forget to pick up at 4 o'clock today because she has an appointment. And she herself has those sorts of similar routines as well. The other thing that I think it might be worth noting is you'll see one of the last actions that is on the Gillian action plan is around actually supporting people who maybe have made a decision about their life that maybe we find uncomfortable. Maybe they have decided that actually they don't want to engage with services, that actually they have felt that they've come towards the end of their life. And I'm not saying that these are easy conversations, but it's how we best support practitioners, and more importantly as well, the adult to be thinking that through and how we've engaged with them. It's a really difficult area, I think, within social work practice to actually, I'm sure we all struggle with our own family to talk about, how do you want to die? How do you want the end of your life to be? These are very difficult conversations for us to have, and actually as a society we don't often have them. And we can then look like we are potentially interfering if somebody has made this conscious decision, and it's how we can then best support people. And I think it's a very difficult thing even for me to sit here and say to you in this room today when I'm not talking about you in particular. So I can only understand how difficult that is for our practitioners to have. So it's how we can support them. And I think that's, I think it is point 6 on the Gillian SAR outcomes, where it says that the SSA-SPB, which is obviously the Safeguarding Board, should consider how people can best be supported in circumstances where they are mentally capacious, self-neglect, refuse help, and have made a decision about the quality of their life. And some of that is for people that's just where they've come to. So it's how we can best support our practitioners, and that's some of the work we're looking at and the training we're developing.
Thank you for that. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you. Clearly something of this nature needs to be in place. But I think agency is everything. If you read the works of Ellen Langer, who's Professor of Psychology at Harvard, people live longer when they live their own lives and they're not lived for them. Now, the difficulty with self-neglect compared to other forms of safeguarding, as far as I can see, is there's no third-party involvement. And because there's no third-party involvement, it's far harder to assess. And it's very culturally dependent. I mean, you've said that yourself. The evidence is coming to the view that we're far too hygienic, and that's why there's so much allergy going around. So maybe a bath once a week will come back. So it's incumbent upon us as a system to have a robust appeals process that needs to be entirely independent of us and easily accessible. So what is the appeals process for this?
So we have an appeals process within our safeguarding board procedures, and that forms part of our safeguarding process. So anybody can appeal the outcome of a Section 42 inquiry. We also obviously use the complaints process as well as part of that. But we, as I say, would, for people who are involved in a safeguarding inquiry, we would always recommend the use of the appeals process in the first instance. And that's then initially looked at us by as a local authority, as anything should be, and then can go to the board and to one of the other partner agencies for review of that, should that be requested.
The devil's in the detail for this, I think. And I just wonder whether this particular aspect of safeguarding, because of its unique nature, that the appeals process should be a bit more robust. And I'm not sure it should be done by us in the first instance, for instance.
I will take those comments back and have a review of that along with colleagues, also obviously as well from my complaints team as well. I think we sometimes have to be careful because a lot of our our other processes fall first of all to people having had a review done by us as a local authority. So if you go to the Ombudsman will only consider that if we have first been able to look at it as a local authority. I think that there's a way that we always do manage concerns by having other people other than the ones who have initially dealt with it review that. So we try and have an element of impartiality as much as we can. I would have to review the data. I'm not aware of any particular concerns we've had raised by people who have, where self-neglect has been a factor in any complaints, but I will make sure that I go back and double check to see the nature of that. The other element of that is quite often these end up within one of our, or not quite often where they need to, they will end up in one of our court processes, for which then that is then independently reviewed by a judge.
Please.
Sorry to labour this point, but I think it's really important that in an appeals process in relation to this, that whoever sees the appeal has to be able to see the individual concerned, and that they state their case.
And that should happen as part of an appeal, because the appeal is about contact with the person to understand why they've made their appeal.
Thank you for that. Presumably, when we say there's no third party, would I be right in assuming that most of these things are reported by a third party? So there would be some sort of check and balance about the person who raised the concern in the first place. Also, rather than an appeal, do we have a robust sort of risk escalation process that recognises that these things are likely to go? And the last question is, at some stage, I assume that there's a bit of a crossover with the Mental Health Act as well, and there is then the power, of course, to take people to a place of safety, isn't there, under, I don't know if it's 33 or 30, I can never remember, but is there a coordination of those particular factors when we consider some of this?
So yes, self-neglect is often reported by another person. Quite often, actually, I think we found it to be ambulance crew who have attended. This hasn't been identified before. Sometimes a district nurse who's gone out. So quite often it's our health colleagues who refer this into us. Or at times as well, there is from people within our housing associations too, who have conducted a visit, etc. But I think the point that had been made, that obviously there's no third party involved in the abuse itself, whereas when we normally would be completing an inquiry, we've almost got that other person who then we can work with as well, whereas this is very much, it can be, that's why we try to be proportionate when we use it, because actually it is quite obviously an intense process for somebody who, as we say, has capaciously made a decision not to have involvement with us, and we're sort of in there, you know, sort of engaging with them. So there is that, and obviously then we do have hopefully other eyes on the person to better assess the risk. I completely agree with your second point around the need for clear escalation and risk assessment processes. And you'll see in the report, this is one area that we've been working on, because I don't think that's been there. And I actually haven't seen our escalation process used at all. And this for me is a real concern, because actually lots of people talk about the fact that we don't always, or they feel that maybe people aren't engaging in the process, or we're not getting partner involvement. But I'm reticent to say that as an absolute when we don't have the evidence to support that. So we've been making it clear around the escalation process within the new guidance, and we're also looking at putting a forum together, a multi-agency forum together. This is going to take time, so don't think this is going to happen in weeks. But having a multi-agency forum where where situations like this and others can be brought, so we can better assess that risk and work and use those knowledge and skills. And that links in, I think, as well with the potential use for other parts of our legislation, including the Mental Health Act. Quite often, actually, self-neglect doesn't really fall within that arena. We tend to find we're looking more either at the Court of Protection if we have some concerns about capacity, or the High Court and the use of inherent jurisdiction, where we can take action to prevent somebody from coming to harm. But there is always that consideration, particularly if we feel their mental health has deteriorated as a result, which is then placing them at further risk of harm.
Thank you. Councillor McMahon, did you indicate you wanted to come back about something?
You covered the point, actually. It's not a question of a third party not being involved in presenting the case. It's a third party perpetrating the neglect or the abuse. That's the issue. And that's what's absent here, which makes judgment all the more difficult.
Thank you for that. Councillor Edgar.
Thank you very much, Chairman, really. You know, we're sat in this meeting now, and there's probably people out there that are suffering from self-neglect. You know, I'm talking about the older generation, actually, you know, that we don't know about. I mean, my question, and you probably answered part of it, Ruth, actually, but what input do we get from the fire people and the police and that? What percentage of complaint, you know, or, yeah, how do they get involved? Thank you.
So certainly the fire service are a really useful partner and are really well engaged in this area. Because actually they're more likely to get access to somebody's home than we are. And they are, I have to say, they have been incredible through the workshops we've been doing with regards to developing the new practice guidance, the work that they're looking at doing and supporting us with, and also their ability as well and their openness to being able to go out and visit people who may not allow us access or may not allow health. I don't know whether it is still that thing of, oh, you know, fire service, aren't they lovely people? Coming in to do those fire safety checks for people, and opening up a conversation which for people seems to feel more non-threatening than either ourselves, police or health colleagues who people feel may be more, I say, judgmental. I don't think, you know, that's the case, but we understand that that can be people's perceptions. So actually the fire service are really good at recognising self-neglect, have got really good training within their area. The police as well, from the point of view of the harm reduction hubs and also the work that we're doing with them at the MASH, that's one area that we're looking at alongside, you know, colleagues as well from Stoke-on-Trent with the pilot that we ran around Pit Stop, looking at some of those earlier concerns. So all of these things, it's around getting information at the earliest opportunity, which, as I say at the moment, is the hardest thing for us when it comes to self-neglect. So raising that awareness, and this work that we've been doing has enabled us to do that with those partners.
Please do.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, we as councillors actually have probably got a part to play in this. And I remember, it's a few years ago now, I got a phone call from neighbours saying, I'm worried about so-and-so across the road. His car's parked in a funny position and I don't know what to do about it. I'm not seeing him either. And I phoned another colleague and I said, would you come with me and let me knock on the door with me? I didn't want to go on my own. And which I did, and the gentleman actually wouldn't let anybody in the house. But this particular occasion, I said to him, you're not well, you know, can you? And he let me in the house. Well, I couldn't believe what I saw, actually. There was about 3 or 4 layers of newspaper on the bedroom floor and all packets. Absolutely, I couldn't believe it. And I actually found the gentleman was ill. I got the ambulance there, and unfortunately he went into hospital and he didn't come out. But the house, actually, I couldn't believe it, absolutely. So what I'm saying to us councillors is we've got a part to play. If we've got a phone call from a neighbour, you know, then don't go on your own, but please investigate. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Councillor Perry.
Thank you. It's not so much a question, but really as a bit of an observation. It's a shame, really. It's a difficult subject to talk about, this is, isn't it? And we talk about self-neglect quite often in the report. Self-neglect isn't really a nice... Self-neglect isn't quite a nice word, really, is it? Because the person that it's happening to doesn't realise that it's something that they're bringing on themselves, if you know where I'm coming from. They go about the daily routine like they've always done, and things tend to happen that they sort of can't do what they used to do. And there's probably far more people out there than we actually know about in this report. Because unless something goes wrong, such as has just been mentioned, the fire service are called in for some reason, or somebody hasn't been seen for quite a while. And that's a difficult one to sort of overcome, because like you've just said, you don't want to take people's independence away, but at the same time we need to be observant that there are those people out there that are struggling for whatever reason. It's right that we as councillors, but it's not until we're notified that we can actually do something about it. It's a pity the old system of neighbourly generations isn't the same anymore, because it's about knocking the door to see if your neighbour's okay. And it's a shame, because sometimes it's too late when somebody gets there. They've already sort of, something's happened. And then it's everybody's then to blame. There's a blaming culture then, isn't there? You know, why wasn't he or she identified, or whatever the case might be. So I don't envy your task in sorting this out. I'm sure if there's any way that we as a council, as a committee, and as a council, can actually help to sort of prevent any of these kind of situations, then please let us know. I don't, as I say, I don't envy your task. It's not an easy read, even the people that you've just mentioned in there, because we take away, you don't take away people's independence. That's not what it's about. It's just, it's caring, isn't it? And like I say, it's not so much a question, it's more of an observation. And I think it needs to be said, because I think we all around the table feel exactly the same way. So thank you anyway for what you do, and we can only do our best. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and I think you're absolutely right. It is a really difficult subject to even talk about, and that's why for me the training of staff is so important, to help them have those sensitive conversations with people, and also for us to be able to talk about it so that actually the awareness of it grows, and so actually some of this is identified at an earlier opportunity, which maybe then, because we often work with people then when behaviours have become entrenched, because actually they've developed ways of coping and managing after loss or changes in their life, and they've been left to deal with these, and that then further can complicate it. So no, thank you for that recognition.
Well, thank you very much for that. Thank you for coming along and sharing the report with us and talking us through. I think, just to echo what's already been said, quite a challenging area, must be a very difficult area. And that element of proportionality, which I think you talked about, is key to this, isn't it? Is getting that right. And we do seem to have the balance of that right. So, again, thank you for the report. Thank you for coming and sharing it with us. Moving on then to item 7 adult safeguarding update. I assume it's the same people. Adult safeguarding update. Councillor Northcott, did you want to introduce?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and thank you for asking us back again. And it won't come as a great surprise to learn this is an update of where we were and where we left off from the previous report. Thank you. I'll move on swiftly. Thank you.
Sorry, Ruth, were you going to talk us through? If you could, please.
As has been said, this is our update. You can see that work has been continuing to progress. I would note that we have been experiencing yet again increased demand, for which we are managing as well as we can and maintaining our numbers under within those remit of under 300 concerns waiting at any one time. We continue to risk assess as we always have been, and we are monitoring the rate of closure. As you can see, our target is 80%, and we were at 1.90% closed within 5 days. That was when we pulled this report to 75, and does fluctuate from month to month. However, I would say that we remain confident that we've got a much, as you will know, we've gone through some very difficult times, that we're nowhere near that level of deterioration within our figures or within our response, even through some increases in concerns. Just to note as well that we are going to be having some changes within our team. 2 of our most long-standing advanced practitioners are moving on to pastures new, still within the local authority, but obviously that will impact on our work over the coming months. But we are very well supported and already have some temporary resource in place to fill that whilst we have also successfully recruited, but that will take some time. But we are managing that. As well. Just the only other thing I wanted to say, which I didn't mention in the report, is that we have actually had some funding from ADAS for some consultancy support as well. We will be having 5 days of consultancy support paid by ADAS to look at our very front end of our safeguarding process to see whether there's any way that we can further streamline that work as well. So hopefully that's going to provide just a further and independent as well overview over how we're managing our safeguarding concerns, which hopefully will aid any discussions we have with CQC in the coming months.
Thank you. No, I think excellent report again, and I'm always pleased to see just how well we do tackle issues around adult safeguarding. The only question I have is that, looking at the data, would you agree that there does seem to be something of a seasonal blip in these things? And if we are, as I'm sure we are, trying to hit our target, and we're not too far away from that, do we have the flexibility around staffing and resources to be able to, because it always seems to be the same shape of graph, doesn't it? You know, that I don't know whether it's sort of September, end of the summer, whether that impacts on people or not. I'd just be interested to know whether, you know, we do have the flexibility to move resources around.
So this is really interesting, because this was my point. Others maybe feel that the data is too fluctuating to say that there really is that seasonal variation. So I think that was raised at our last quarterly safeguarding meeting, because I would say that I see there being an issue through our summer months, and a lot of that, particularly during August into September, is obviously due to annual leave of staff, etc. So we are, as a result of that, though, still looking at how we can be more flexible with our current arrangements. And hence, again, that's why we're looking at this ADAS work to see whether there is something that we can do differently and whether we're using our resources effectively, responding in the right way. Looking at that flexibility of resource. We have, as I say, some very good links with some temporary staff who will come in to us, who like working with us, who will come in at quite short notice to support us. And as I say, we've got those in place now ready for the staff that are going to leave. And it is obviously just as to whether from a funding perspective that is additional resource, obviously.
Councillor Northcott.
Thank you, Chair. Just to mention, it isn't in the report, but as you know, because you've been invited, but unfortunately you haven't been able to attend, we now conduct quarterly reviews of our own processes, so things like staffing are discussed. So hopefully with that review meeting every quarter, it flags up things at an early stage where we were aware of those and we put in measures to tackle that.
Thank you for that. Also, from the stats as well, we 99% of critical concerns. Does that hint at some sort of triaging type process that I personally think that's probably more important than a basic target if we can get to those that are perhaps the more threatening and more risky, and we seem to be doing that well.
Absolutely, and so we have started to monitor that because I think it came out of this committee that actually, how do we know we're making sure we're getting to the most risky? It's well and good looking at those that we do over within a 5-day period, but are we meeting the targets for those most at risk? So this figure is monitoring exactly that and does absolutely link with the triage that's done. As I've said before, all concerns are triaged on the day they're received, so are looked at, reviewed, immediate risks identified, and then they're given a risk rating at that point. So where they're high risk, critical, then they will be looked at within that, within those timescales. So it is reassuring. I did do a little check as well on the 1% that weren't. Because I thought somebody's going to ask me, what about the 1%, Ruth? So I thought I must have a look at the ones that were in the 1%. Previous experience has taught me. So the 1%, from the ones I looked at, which is actually quite a small amount, I'm sure you can understand, these were ones that came in as critical, so had that immediate response, and that immediate response then reduced the risk almost immediately. So they then took the 5 days as opposed to being done within a sort of shorter time period. And one of them actually did take a full 14 days, but that's because the original concern really wasn't there when it was initially looked into. So I'm reassured that even those that 1% was okay. That's what I'd be saying. Does that make sense?
But you're actually saying it's 100%.
Well, I'm not going to say that because statistically it's 99% of those that were highlighted as critical.
Thank you very much. Councillor McMahon.
The online portal we refer to, is that to refer into the system or to engage with providers to help?
That is for providers to make referrals to us.
That's what I thought. Is there it's very easy for these online things just to be tick box exercises, which wouldn't get over the nuance of the sort of stuff that you have to deal with. Is there the opportunity to free text?
There's so much opportunity to free text. Okay. And actually, it is designed around the questions that we ask if somebody was to phone. And if you don't fill in the right boxes, then it's not going to be made. Because one of our other concerns that we've had previously where people have emailed concerns through to us, we spend an amount of time trying to get hold of people to get further information, which just delays our decision making. So by having the portal in this way, we should be making sure we get sufficient. As I say, it's in a test phase, and hopefully after Christmas I'll be able to report as to how that's gone and whether we're going to be putting it out there more widely. We hope then after this portal with providers, once that's up and running, we will then seek to put this out as well to other services and also then as well to adults and members of the community too.
Thank you for that, and thank you again for coming along and sharing that with us. Really good news, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Moving on then to item 8, which is the work programme. You'll see the short report at the end of the list. Helen, would you help us with that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So you will note that originally we had an item that was due to be included today on the family support, and that was an item for pre-decision. That was put back and now is going to Cabinet in December, so it will be included on our November agenda. We've also put in an extra meeting on the 8th of October, which is a one-item only agenda to look at SEND, and that was or is to look at the current position, because obviously this is a new area of work for this committee now, and also to look at the processes and preparation for inspection, and to see what value that scrutiny can add to that process. So those are the significant changes. One other thing, members had previously mentioned the possibility of looking at a working group on care director, the replacement for that. If I just take you very briefly back through the process. So care director is going to be replaced. There was a discussion quite some time ago about whether or not members should do a working group. It was decided not, but the chair and vice chair of this committee and also of health had a briefing with officers to look at the process that they were going through. And then the idea is, I think, that in October there was going to be some sort of a joint meeting where you'd look at the work that was done. However, when we had our sort of first get-together looking at work programme planning in the new municipal year, because you'd got some changes to membership, and I think it was Mrs Jessel who suggested that a work programme around this might be useful. And as a consequence, I've spoken to officers to see exactly where we are in the process, because clearly the process has been moving on for some time now. There is the plan to return to full cabinet to make the final decision and award the contract has now been delayed until February. So I imagine our joint meeting will be delayed. So there is some gap in time there. So it's whether or not members want me to push forward with that, or whether members are thinking that the joint meeting as was originally suggested is where you'd like to be. It's some thoughts, please, on how you want me to take that forward, really.
I suppose my initial thoughts really is that we have a meeting once that's decided, together with health, and then maybe make a decision about how we want to take it forward from then. Okay, would it be worthwhile me going back to colleagues who've updated me on this and just double check where we are? I know members had previously said no working group, but particularly because it's one of those things that if we did it, we'd need to do it jointly with health. Yeah. But then since then, we revisited the possibility of doing that. I'm just very conscious that everything has moved on quite considerably from when we originally were discussing it. So would it be sensible if I go back, just have a quick word with Nicola and then email everybody to say where we are, so that you can all come back to me and say whether or not you're comfortable with us then doing that. The joint meeting, I think originally we'd said we'd meet just before it went to Cabinet, and it was going to be joint with Health because obviously it crosses over the two committees. As pre-decision, really. So, in other words, they will have made the decision really on what the replacement is going to be and why that has been chosen, and it was going to be pre-decision prior to Cabinet to see if you're comfortable with that. But there is the option of doing further work if members want. So I'll get some information from Nicola, and then I'll email it to everybody if that's helpful, and then we can make a decision then. Any other thoughts, or are people happy with that? Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming out. My fears of going on till 2 o'clock were misplaced, but thank you again for coming along and all the contributions.